Sylvia, thank you for joining us and your willingness to be our first person today. Sylvia, you have so much to share with us. We have such a short period of time, so we'll start right away if that's okay. You were not yet 5 years old when Germany invaded Poland September 1st, 1939, starting the First World War. But before we turn to the war and the Holocaust, first tell us what you can about those first years of your life and your family before the war began. What was their life like?
Before the war, I remember we had a nice life. I remember family dinners, holidays. My mother was the best cook, so everybody came to our house. I remember very little, but I do remember we used to rent a summer home. And I have those pictures always I see it's in the backyard, trees. So we used to spend the summer. My father used to come out for the weekend. And we had, I remember, always a good time.
You shared with me that your mother was a good cook.
Yes.
She also liked American silent movies.
Yes. She used to go to watch American silent movies. That's correct.
And your father, he had served in the Polish army earlier, hadn't he?
He only went. He didn't fight a war, but he just did his military.
Did his military duty
yes,
in the Polish army. How large was your extended family? Did you have a large family?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and they all live not too far from each other.
Mm-hmm.
We all live. My mother also had brothers and sisters.
So that meant you had lots of aunts, uncles, and cousins.
Yes, I did.
Of course, September 1st, 1939, Germany invades Poland, and within 7 days, the German army had occupied your city of Lodz, beginning the Holocaust and all the horrors that would follow. Tell us what you can about that period after the Germans came in, but before you were forced to go into the ghetto, that period of time. It didn't last long, but what happened in that period?
The only thing I remember that we happened to live near that area, so we didn't have to move.
Okay.
But other people came in and became very crowded, and we were four. The apartments were very small even before the war. We had a very large room and a kitchen, and another family came to live with us. So there were 3 more people. So we were 7 people.
Yeah. And let me ask you just a couple of questions before we turn to what it was like for you in the ghetto. When the Germans came in, your family left, tried to go to Warsaw, right?
Oh, yes. When the Germans came in, they decided they didn't want any Jewish people in the city of Lodz. So we had to leave. Everybody left. My father, what I remember, rented a horse and buggy and a driver, and we were 4 and an aunt with 2 other children and a husband. We drove to Warsaw, but when we arrived, Warsaw was bombed.
Right.
The whole streets, many sections, there was not a house. We couldn't find where to live, and my father realized he won't find work, so he decided to go back, which it was a very good decision he made.
As it turned out, although you wouldn't know that for a long time.
Right.
And it was in that period, I think, that you were first forced to start wearing the yellow star, which is the title of your book.
Yeah. When the Germans formed the ghetto, they put barbed wires, and German soldiers stood all around to make sure we don't escape. Also, we were forced to wear the yellow star, one in the back, one in the front, and we had to give up all our valuable, all the radios. Many people had radios, so for 6 years, we didn't know what was happening in Germany. We didn't know what was happening in the war at all. How long, we didn't expect that it's going to last 6 years.
A moment ago, you began to tell us about what it was like in the ghetto, how crowded you were, all of you living in 2 small rooms. One of the things that you shared with me was that, of course, you didn't have a toilet in there. The toilet was outside.
Yeah,
and you described in your book, as a 5-year-old, how frightening that was to you to have to go out by yourself in the courtyard.
Later on. Before the war, I had my mom who took care of me, but after the war, what was, I want to explain, I was left after a while alone, my mother and father. What the German did, that city had many factories before the war. Mm-hmm. That's why they chose the city to make the ghetto and put the people to work. But I was too young, but my sister, even she was 11 and 12 children went to work in the factories. So after a while, I was left alone. But the couple who moved in had a little girl my age. Mm-hmm. So I had a little girl, a friend, and across the hallway, there was another, a little bit older little girl, maybe 7, and she had a baby brother in the crib, so we all gathered and stayed there till our parents came back from work.
So just you 4 children.
Yeah. And we were not allowed, we were told to go out.
Right.
So we stayed a whole day and waited for the parents to come home and cook some meal. Now, can I talk about food?
Yes.
Food was the most important thing. Mostly we were always hungry. We received very little food. After work, my mother or father had to wait in line to get some food. So there was always a long line, I remember. And sometimes when you arrive at the window to get the food, it was gone. Mm-hmm. So hunger was the worst part, what I remember. Mm-hmm. We received, I remember, 1 bread and had to last us for a week. So every day you only could have 1 slice. But I had wonderful parents. When my sister and I were hungry, they gave us their piece of bread. Mm-hmm. I am here because my father had the courage to do many things, but he was not allowed and to save me.
You tell us about your father sneaking or bringing some flour in.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
My father, they always ask the German, what was your profession before the war? If the person was a shoemaker, they put them to make shoes in a factory, or a tailor. My uncle was making furniture. Everything what was made was sent to Germany. Mm-hmm. And working, you receive a little soup and another slice of bread. Mostly the soup was water. If you were happy to have a few pieces of potato and some cabbage in the soup. But my father used to sell wholesale flour and sugar. And it happened that my father was very strong, and you had to carry 100 pounds of flour on your shoulder. They deliver on a horse and buggy to the bakery. And sometimes a little flour got spilled. So there was a group of men who were assigned certain street to deliver the flour, and that helped us with the flour. Sometimes he could bring home. But what was nice, there were maybe, I don't remember, 4 or 5 men. Sometimes one man couldn't get a little flour. So if 3 men got it, they went to a house. You have to be very careful, nobody could see. and weigh it and divide it between the
And they would
group.
secret in a little
Yeah, and
hidden
secret
pouch.
packet. They were wearing like white shirts, and dressmakers made secret packet. It was just a little bit, but that little bit helped us with the hunger.
What work were your mother and your sister forced
My
to do?
sister and my mother worked in a factory for women undergarment.
And those, of course, were sent to
So
Germany.
everything what was made was sent to Germany. We were not allowed to take even. If the German would find you wanted to bring something home, they just could kill you. When the barbed wire, if you walk next to the barbed wire, sometimes you had to go to work, was very close to the barbed wire. And if the German felt to call you and just, so you had to go over to the close, he could just kill you for fun.
Sylvia, you mentioned the two friends you had. I think they were Hava and Itka.
Yeah.
In the spring of 1941, you'd already been in the ghetto for more than a year at that time. You said in your book, you wrote that Hava was missing, and that was very traumatic for you.
This happened later on when they had to leave. I don't want to, in 1944, they liquidated the ghetto.
Right.
And that's why they all left,
They all
Hava
left,
and
yeah.
Itka. The reason is they chose the 800 people to clean up the belonging who were able to carry the furniture.
Like your father was
Like
very
my
strong.
father, yes.
So we'll come back to that in just a minute. So
Yes.
as awful as things were in the ghetto for you, the hunger and the terrible living conditions, sanitary conditions, things turned terrifically, horribly worse in 1942 when the deportations
Yes.
to Hell No, which was a killing center, began doing that.
And the people didn't know where they were going.
Right.
The German advertised they have better factory in Germany and there's going to be more food. And some people thought they're going to a better life.
Right.
But most of the people were afraid of the unknown. And that was my father.
And in 1943, the Nazis targeted children.
Yes.
And so how did your father protect you?
This was my worst part. When I speak, I sit at the desk every Monday and people come over and when I tell the story. And that was my worst part because I couldn't work. So my parents had to give me away. And of course, my father wouldn't do it and my mother. So the ghetto was quite large. He found places where to hide me. But the German, after a while, found those places. So that was my personal tragedy, which it stayed with me for a long time, because the last place he hit me was one of the worst places.
Was that the cemetery?
Yeah. There was a cemetery in our courtyard. There was a brick wall and very tall, and behind was a cemetery. And that day, the German came at night because during the days they used to barricade certain streets. People ran away to someplace else, grabbing the children. It happened to my aunt. She thought they're gonna come. She lived in the same apartment house we did, and she thought they're gonna come to our street. And she went to her sister on a different street. And they didn't come to us, and they came there. And she had to grab, she had a small child, maybe not 2 years old, and they grabbed from her hand the child. It was tragedy for the mothers to give up the children.
Can
and
you
fathers.
can you say a little bit more about what it was like for you to be hidden in a cemetery?
So this is my worst part. So my father climbed the wall, and I remember because I was already 44, I was 9, almost 8.5 or 9, and I started to cry. I don't know, I didn't know exactly what would happen to me if the German would take me away, but I just started to cry. They're gonna kill me, they're gonna kill me. So my father grabbed me and we climbed that wall and threw me over, and he digged a hole. I don't remember if he had a shovel. Excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
But I could only stay. I couldn't sit in the hole. I remember just staying, and he covered me with grass, and there was some straw, and he told me to wait till he would come back, and I had to be quiet. And that took the rest of the night and the next day. Mm-hmm. Next day, late afternoon, finally, the German went away, and my sister came to tell us. My father stayed around there, but not near me, like he made believe he's cleaning up. Mm-hmm. And after coming out from the hall, I became really, really scared for everything, and it lasted a long time. Even when I was an adult, even I lived in France for 10 years, I didn't speak after the war about what was happening to me. I didn't have help from psychologists or psychiatrists, which I needed to get over the fear. I always imagined they're gonna come and grab me. I had this dream for 14 years. Then I'm in the hall and the German comes and kills me. He stays with the gun. But thank God, when I came to America, the dream stopped. And when I started volunteering 5 years ago, I was afraid this is going to come back, but it didn't. So that was a...
And Sylvia, as it turned out, there were other people hiding in the cemetery too.
Yes, children, yes.
Other children, and then...
But they were not in a hole. They were just sitting there in between the stones.
And at some point, the Nazis realized that. So where did your father hide you after that?
After that, the Germans make a new law. You could have one child per family. And my sister, she was working, so I was the only child. And when they used to come, everybody had to get out of the building and stay in the courtyard. So I remember, was a pink slip. Once we showed this slip, I was okay. But my father had a good friend who worked with him. And I remember when the law came out to give, you can only have one child, he had a boy and a girl. And I remember sitting, I was 9 years old, and the wife came, what should we do? My father was like the leader of the group, and they always asked him advice. And he came to our house, and they were crying, boss, we don't know to give away the boy or the girl. And I remember my father saying to them, you don't give away no children. Go downstairs with the girl. And he took the boy. In our apartment, we had a large armoire where you put your clothes. He moved that furniture, he thought the little boy would have more courage than the little girl. I don't remember, they were maybe like 2 years difference between them. And he hit him there, and he made believe like he is going out from the room, and he came back and said in German, everybody out, and the little boy didn't move, and they survived. They are here in the United States someplace.
Sylvia, your parents were able to keep you hidden. under unbelievable circumstances, but it became even more difficult
Yes,
when they decided to liquidate the
Yes.
ghetto.
When they liquidated ghetto, they needed people to clean up the belonging. The people who left could only take a little backpack and a bottle of water. So they had beautiful furniture, they had other nice things. And what the German wanted is the 800 people to go house to house. The ghetto was like a ghost town, and pick up the belonging and are taken to the train, I think on a horse and buggies, there was no trucks, and everything went to Germany. So they chose the people, all the people who work with my father, because they were used to lift heavy things, and other people who were well. So they made a selection, and I remember staying outside. I don't remember exactly where people were standing, and the leader of the ghetto, who was a very, very vicious man, came very close to me, and he had a leather strap, and he was wearing leather boots, and he was knocking that strap on his boots, and being 9 years old, he was so close to me that I thought he's going to hit me. So he looked at my father, looked at my mother and my sister, and he said, 3 of you can stay, but this little, he called me a bad name in German, and he said, you have to go left. Left means to go. And if you were chosen right, is to stay. So here was the dilemma. My father had to make a decision. For some reason, he made, during the war, the right decision. It's luck and making the right decision. He decided that he's not going. And all his friends were looking at him. You know what's going to happen. They would kill the whole family. So they put the 800 people in 2 factories. One was men and one for women. And my father went to look at the factory. He knew the city very well, and he saw there was a basement. So he said to his friends, I cannot tell you what to do, but I am going to hide my daughter. And he had a brother who had a little boy who was 3 years old. So I took my cousin by the hand and we went down the basement. And the other people had a dilemma. They didn't know, they were afraid to do what my father, but some of them decided. I don't remember exactly how many children. I said 12 children to my niece, Jennifer Roy, in my book, but maybe we were 11, maybe 13, was just a handful of children, because the other people who had children, they didn't want to stay, and they were not on the list. My father was on the list. And we stayed in that basement not long. I don't remember if it was a week, but there was no place to sit. We had to sit on the floor and keep quiet. In the evening, the mothers and the fathers brought us some food. In that camp, the women organized a kitchen, and when they went to the houses, they found some food, and in the bakeries they found flowers, and that was summertime, so there was garden. We all had a little garden in the backyard, so they picked up the vegetables, and at least the women cooked vegetable soup. We didn't have meat and flour. I don't know what they did with the flowers.
You had a little bit of food.
So we were not as hungry like before, because we were 800 people in the soup, so we had soup. And
If I could stop for just a second, to put it in the context for our audience, when you were first forced into the ghetto, there were 160,000 Jews. When they liquidated it in 1944, there were 75,000. Now there's 800 of you, and 10 or 11 children.
No, that
were left.
Yeah, maybe. Actually, what happened, some people passed away, and at the end, when it was like 756, I know my niece found out.
But a very
small amount.
At one point, after you children, because you were not supposed to be there, you're hidden in this basement.
Yeah.
At some point, you decided to go out.
No, we didn't.
You didn't?
I'm sorry. What happened, we were sitting there quiet, and one day the door opens and the German coming down the steps. Someone told the German, we didn't know who did it, and the German took us out from the basement and made us walk. The German stood quite far from the camp, and I remember taking my little cousin by the hand, and we walked, and they were talking, making decisions, and at the end they brought us back to the camp. We children didn't understand. We thought they're gonna kill us,
right.
The older kids. But the reason the Germans decided to do this is because they were planning soon to kill all 800 people. And killing just the children would create chaos. The Germans always wanted everything to go smooth. So just killing the children would create a problem for them. There were not too many Germans in that house guarding us. They were far away, but they had a telephone, and many people asking me, how come there were young men, why didn't they kill those 3, 4, I don't know if there were 3, 4, the most 5. They had a telephone, and every day came a call from Berlin if everything is okay. And if we would kill the German would arrive and kill us all.
Right.
So that's why I heard this actually from my father, when he was talking, when someone asked him why they didn't kill.
So after
So we came back to the camp, but by that time we could hear bombs falling, but like far away. And one day I looked up in the skies, there were so many planes, maybe 20 or 25, but they were like toys. They were observing where to go. And the bombs were coming closer and closer. So when the men dig the holes.
And talk about that, about the men digging the holes.
Yes.
Say a little more about that.
I just know my father came. We had a secret door between the women factories and the men, and they came and they were not talking sad, and everybody asked what happened, and they told we had to dig 3 holes, and I think it's for us. So we had a leader. They just assigned this man to keep everything quiet if 2 people were fighting, and he said, the only thing I can do is to open the doors for you and go hide yourself. The ghetto was a ghost town,
right.
And it was January. The snow was up to our knees. Where do you go? You cannot go to the Polish part because the Germans were still guarding us. So groups were formed, and each group decided, they remember one house had a basement, and because we couldn't go out 756 people in one place or groups, for some reason my father waited to the end. he could not believe at that time this is going to happen. But then, you couldn't walk on the street, but my father could walk to the backyard, and he and other men went to the backyard where the German house was, and there was like a big plaza empty, and he saw all those cars, motorcycles, so many German arrived. When I am talking about German, I'm talking about Nazis. The Nazis did the killing, but the German soldiers were soldiers. And he saw all those Nazis arriving because to kill all so many people, they needed
To kill the remaining,
Yeah.
750.
So then my father decided it's time to go, and the group waited for him. And we went to the backyard. My father was very smart. He decided to hide in the house across where the German was staying. He was thinking, once they go house to house, this is the last house they're going to be looking.
The one right next to their...
And he could see there was a dark shade. He made a little hole for his eye, and he could see what was happening there. So I remember my mother had a bread, and she took, and we just put our clothes and walked to that place. And there was a big room, and some people sat on the floor. I don't know how many parents had children, so the children could sit or lay down if it was a bed there. I remember it was a bed. So, and we waited. The bombs were coming closer and closer. You could hear them all around. And we were maybe there 3 days because we couldn't cook, we couldn't make a fire because the smoke would come out from the chimney. And if the Russia wouldn't come later, they would find us. They were going already house
Building
to
to
house.
building to building,
Yes.
yep.
And one day, my father and the other men looked out and they saw a woman walking. And, they said, we must be free, liberated. But my father said, let's wait, maybe she's a decoy. And we would come out and the German would grab us. But no, it was the liberation, January 1945.
Tell us more about that, about your liberation. What was that like? What do you remember of that?
I remember coming out of the place and the bombs were falling all over. Do I have time to
Yes.
tell the story about that?
About how you were seen?
When we were laying.
Yes,
with the staff?
I wouldn't let you
don't-
leave here without telling that.
What
Yeah.
time?
We're
We
okay.
have
We're
time.
okay.
When the bombs were falling, I'm going back now, and we were in the camp, we went out and lay on the ground with on our stomach, and the bombs were falling all around. And I remember hearing the bomb first was like a whistle, and I was waiting for the big boom. I was very scared, and my mother said, don't lift your head, just lay still. We were wearing the Star of David on the back too, the yellow star. And this, in American military, he would be a colonel. And he was flying one of the planes who were bombing
One of the
us.
Russian planes, yeah.
Yes, he was a Russia. And he came to our camp at the liberation, and he told us the story. Why they didn't throw bomb on this factory and where we were laying. He happened to be Jewish, and he knew what the yellow star meant. So he called other plane, do not throw bombs on those people. They are Jewish people, and be careful. So the bombs didn't hit us. And he came after to our camp and told us the story. So that was a miracle, because some other planes could throw the bombs and we could get killed even for the...
So they spotted the yellow stars as they were flying
Everyone
over.
had it on when we lay on the ground. And
That's
he had some
incredible.
chocolate. He saw the few children. He says, "Oh, you're the first people we liberated." And he gave us, he had some chocolate and they had some food, but then themselves didn't have much food. They had to go after liberated Poland to liberate Germany. And he was very scared. He told us, we're going to have a big fight to take Berlin, because Hitler said that all the Germans have to defend that city, because once they take the city, the war is over, they lost. But so he was worried if he's going to survive. He says, I have a wife in Moscow with 2 children. I hope I'm going to survive.
So Sylvia, now that the Russians have liberated, they move on as they're
Yes,
advancing.
yes.
What did you and your
And the
family
Russia
do?
told us, you can go to any part of the city, any apartment who's locked, that means German lived there, or Polish who went with the German, you can ask the concierge to unlock, and that's what we did. But I want to tell a story. For many years, I didn't tell the story, and I don't know if you have it. When we were liberated, we went out of our camp and stayed on the street, or not on the sidewalk, and I happened to stay there. The next day, that was the next day, I became 10 years old. And my only language at that time was Polish. And the Polish people came in, they broke the wires, the German ran away, and we didn't clean up all the belonging. And there were factories who still had clothes and fur coats we were making, and they came in and went to all those places, and I saw them carrying clothes, a piece of furniture, and they were walking in the middle of the street, and I was staying on the sidewalk, just happy to see people. I was 10 years old, and I never had any schooling. My sister did taught me the alphabet and adding some numbers and how to sign my name. But I remember this nice-looking blonde lady walking, and she was carrying our belonging, and she looked at, maybe we were 100 or 200 people staying, and she looked and she said, and I heard it, the voice was quite loud, look at how many are still left over. And that, a 10-year-old hit me. I understood exactly what she meant, and in my mind of a 10 years old, I thought they're going to be happy to see us. Then it's never going to be a war anymore.
Because of events like that and others.
This stayed in my mind forever.
And as a result of that, your parents...
I was very shocked to hear her saying this.
Horrible. So your parents made the decision to leave Poland.
No, before we found a nice place, and I went to school. The school was very close where we live, in a nice neighborhood, and because of the school was close, and you had to go where was an apartment, and it was a beautiful area. And my father started his business. He did very well, and we started a new life. We got the place had furniture, but we made new clothes, we bought, you had to go to a dressmaker, we bought material, my father made money, and life started going back to normal till a group of clans formed, and they came from where to people and started to kill us. And in one city, they killed 800 people.
800 Jews. Yeah.
Jews who came, some of them came back from concentration camp. And that was the day my father said, we have to leave. The problem is we couldn't take any suitcases. This was an apartment house, had a concierge, and he watched he had a little booth, and he watched who was coming in, who was going out. And we didn't know if he was a good person. So my father decided no suitcases, no packages. There was a style in Poland when after dinner some people just went for a walk. And that's what we did. We took the money in our clothing, the pictures, what you show, and some paperwork, but my mother put like 2 blouses and a suit, it was 4, and a coat, but nothing else. And I got really upset because I liked one tablecloth what my mother used to use for the holiday. The German didn't take away our clothes, tablecloths or sheets. They were only interested in valuable, like jewelries or painting, special things. So we still had this from before the war, and we had to leave it. Just lock the door and go for a walk to a train station. And from there we went near Germany border, and we had to walk through the border, but we were lucky. My father found a man who was driving with a truck to deliver gasoline, and he hit us behind the gasoline, and I became very ill from that smell. To now I get car sick. But he had to go through the forest. He couldn't go on the main road. So it was a bumpy ride, and we arrived in Germany, and in Berlin there was a displaced camp.
Displaced persons.
Person
right?
camp,
Yep.
displaced person camp, excuse me. And they gave a shot that was American side. Berlin was divided between American, Russia, English,
And the French.
3 parts. And they treated us very nice. The MP was there and took us in, showed us, and we got shots not to get sick. And then we were assigned another displaced person camp near Munich. And we stayed there waiting for a country to take us in. America only allowed people who had relatives. If you didn't have relative, that was 1947, you couldn't come. No country wanted us. So in 1950, Eisenhower, the president, they decided to let in the people from the displaced camp, Jews or not Jews. There were Jewish and not Jewish. There were gypsies. I mean, any religion could come in as long as they were good people. You were checked out, and to come if you didn't have a relative. That was 1950-51. And I don't know, at that time, in 1947, my mother found out she had a brother in Paris from before the war. He lived there for years. And we decided, we wrote a letter and he said to come over. So we had to find a guide and pay him to take us through the border at night. And we arrived in Paris. And finally, I didn't mention much about the Polish school because the children were awful once I said I'm Jewish. In the beginning, I was afraid to say I'm Jewish. So they had religious classes, and that's what created the problem. Once the nun came into religious classes and they learned, they still believed that we killed Jesus. So the kids were hitting me, ripping my clothes, and I used to come crying home. And my sister experimented in high school, she was already, and she also had bad time. But once I arrived in Paris and went to the French school, everybody welcomed me. They didn't even ask me about religion. And this was 47. They just wanted to know from which country and what language I speak. And I was the only little girl, I was 11 by that time, who didn't speak French, and everybody helped me. And being young, I learned fast, and I finally had a normal life. My father had to learn a new profession. The beginning was very, very hard for my parents, but eventually things were getting better. I was 16 years old, my mother gets cancer and dies, and I was devastating. Surviving a whole family, the war, and then she dies after, I became very ill. And I had a sister, Mary, already in America, because my brother-in-law's mother was born in America, and the parents went back to Poland. So she came to take care of me with a little baby girl, maybe 18 months old, and she told me how nice it is to come to America. And I really didn't want to leave another country, and I had to learn another language. But she talked me in, and it was only my father and I, and we decided, when she went back, she started to make papers. But being that I was born in Poland, the American consul in Paris wouldn't give me the visa. We waited almost 6 years, because by that time, Poland became communist. But when he looked, I told him, when we left, I was 20 years old, I remember I used to go often, why we are not receiving the visa? He said, we don't have for Polish citizens, but we left before the communists. I didn't even know what was a communist at that time. But finally, someone told us to reject our citizen, and in a matter of months, we got the visa. So I was also angry. Why didn't I know to do it earlier? I could have been here as a teenager, but we came in 1957.
It was your father and you.
With my father, and I had to learn another language. Now, English was, I never went to school in America, night school for a little while, because I had a job in Albany, New York, and I couldn't make it to night school. We were only 3 people at that time in Albany, New York, night school. But I learned there was already television, and my niece was 4 or 5 years old, and she had baby books. So she asked me to read her the books, and I read it the French way. So she used to tell me, don't say it this way, say it this way. That's how was my first lesson to learn English, and I was eager. But knowing French and knowing some German, I just didn't pronounce the right word. It was written the same as French, so I had to learn to pronounce it the American way. But it was not long I learned to speak. And then I met my husband, David, and we got married in Albany, had a baby boy, and because of my husband's profession, we moved. Most of my life I lived in Rochester, New York. The reason I came to this area is because my son lives here after I lost my husband in 1999. That was another tragedy for me, losing him young. I was the sick person always. He was the healthy person, and he gets leukemia at 64. So that was a big tragedy for me, more than the Holocaust. Then I lost my soulmate, and my friend, and my chauffeur, everything.
Everything. Yeah.
Because I never learned how to drive. And I have 2 grandchildren. Alyssa is a teacher, the 2nd year, and Jeffrey is a professional. All went to college, of course, because I missed that. So I had to educate it myself.
And you've done a remarkable job.
Thank you.
Thank you for being up here. I'm gonna turn back to Sylvia in just a minute to close our program.
Maybe people want to ask me questions?
I think we're not going to have time for that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I'd like to thank you all for being here. Remind you that we will have 3 more programs tomorrow and then next Wednesday and Thursday. But all of our programs are on the museum's YouTube page, and Sylvia's will be posted on the YouTube page as well, so you can view any of our programs. And we'll resume First Person in March of 2020, so we hope that you'll come back sometime. Before Sylvia closes our program, 2 things. One, when she's done, she's going to go up and sign copies of her book, Yellow Star. It's also an opportunity to ask her a question and say hi to her there. So please do that. I think you can sense that there was a great deal that we could not get to. We could have sat here with Sylvia for the rest of the afternoon. Yes. The other thing that will happen is our photographer, Sarah, right here, is going to come up on the stage after Sylvia's done, and she's going to take a picture of Sylvia with you as the background. So we ask that you stay with us so that we can get that photograph for Sylvia. So it's our tradition at First Person that our first person has the last word. So with that, I'd like to ask Sylvia to close our program.
Okay. My volunteering at the museum is very important. Being a survivor, I am a witness to the Holocaust. When I speak to the school children, I always tell them never to hate, be kind to each other.